Chapter 13. A Golden Picnic. Anne, on her way to Orchard Slope, met Diana, bound for Green Gables, just where the mossy old log bridge spanned the brook below the haunted wood, and they sat down by the margin of the Dryad's bubble, where tiny ferns were unrolling like curly-headed green pixie folk wakening up from a nap.
I was just on my way over to invite you to help me celebrate my birthday on Saturday, said Anne.
Your birthday? But your birthday was in March.
That wasn't my fault,
laughed Anne.
If my parents had consulted me, it would never have happened then. I should have chosen to be born in spring, of course. It must be delightful to come into the world with the Mayflowers and violets. You would always feel that you were their foster sister. But since I didn't, the next best thing is to celebrate my birthday in the spring. Priscilla is coming over Saturday, and Jane will be home. We'll all four start off to the woods and spend a golden day making the acquaintance of the spring. We none of us really know her yet, but we'll meet her back there as we never can anywhere else. I want to explore all those fields and lonely places anyhow. I have a conviction that there are scores of beautiful nooks there that have never really been seen, although they may have been looked at. We'll make friends of wind and sky and sun and bring home the spring in our hearts.
It sounds awfully nice, said Diana with some inward distrust of Anne's magic of words. But won't it be very damp in some places yet?
Oh, we'll wear rubbers,
was Anne's concession to practicalities.
And I want you to come over early Saturday morning and help me prepare lunch. I'm going to have the daintiest things possible, things that will match the spring, you understand? Little jelly tarts and lady fingers and drop cookies frosted with pink and yellow icing and buttercup cake. And we must have sandwiches too, though they're not very poetical.
Saturday proved an ideal day for a picnic. A day of breeze and blue, warm, sunny, with a little rollicking wind blowing across meadow and orchard. Over every sunlit upland and field was a delicate flower-starred green. Mr. Harrison, harrowing at the back of his farm and feeling some of the spring witch work even in his sober, middle-aged blood, saw four girls, basket-laden, tripping across the end of his field where it joined a fringing woodland of birch and fir. Their blithe voices and laughter echoed down to him.
It's so easy to be happy on a day like this, isn't it?
Anne was saying with true Annie-ish philosophy.
Let's try to make this a really golden day, girls, a day to which we can always look back with delight. We're to seek for beauty and refuse to see anything else. Begone, dull care! Jane, you are thinking of something that went wrong in school yesterday.
How do you know? Gasped Jane, amazed.
Oh, I know the expression. I felt it often enough on my own face. But put it out of your mind, dear. It will keep till Monday. Or if it doesn't, so much the better. Oh, girls, see that patch of violets? There's something for memory's picture gallery. When I'm 80 years old, if I ever am, I shall shut my eyes and see those violets just as I see them now. That's the first good gift our day has given us.
If a kiss could be seen, I think it would look like a violet, said Priscilla. Anne growled.
I'm so glad you spoke that thought, Priscilla. Instead of just thinking it and keeping it to yourself, this world would be a much more interesting place, although it is very interesting anyhow, if people spoke out their real thoughts.
It would be too hot to hold some folks, quoted Jane sagely.
I suppose it might be, but that would be their own faults for thinking nasty things. Anyhow, We can tell all our thoughts today because we are going to have nothing but beautiful thoughts. Everybody can say just what comes into their head. That is conversation. Oh, here's a little path I never saw before. Let's explore it.
Beyond were the backfields of the farms that ran out to the upper Carmody Road. Just before them, hemmed in by beeches and firs, but open to the south, was a little corner, and in it a garden, or what had once been a garden. A tumble-down stone dyke, overgrown with mosses and grass, surrounded it. Along the eastern side ran a row of garden cherry trees, white as a snowdrift. There were traces of old paths still, and a double line of rose bushes through the middle. But all the rest of the space was a sheet of yellow and white narcissi in their airiest, most lavish, wind-swayed bloom above the lush green grasses.
"Oh, how perfectly lovely!"
3 of the girls cried. Anne only gazed in eloquent silence.
"How in the world does it happen that there ever was a garden back here?"
said Priscilla in amazement. "It must be Hester Gray's garden," said Diana. "I've heard Mother speak of it, but I never saw it myself. I've heard Mother speak of it, but I never saw it before, and I wouldn't have supposed that it could be in existence still. You've heard the story, Anne?"
"No, but the name seems familiar to me."
"Oh, you've seen it in the graveyard. She is buried down there in the poplar corner. You know the little brown stone with the opening gates carved on it and said, 'Sacred to the memory of Hester Gray, aged 22. Jordan Gray is buried right beside her, but there's no stone to him. It's a wonder Marilla never told you about it, Anne. To be sure, it happened 30 years ago, and everybody has forgotten it.'"
"Well, if there's a story, we must have it," said Anne. "Let's sit right down here among the narcissi, and Diana will tell it. Why, girls, there are hundreds of them. They're spread over everything. It looks as if the garden were carpeted with moonshine and sunshine combined. This is a discovery worth making. To think that I've lived within a mile of this place for 6 years and have never seen it before. Now, Diana."
"Long ago," began Diana, "this farm belonged to old Mr. David Gray. He didn't live on it. He lived where Silas Swold lives now. He had one son, Jordan, and he went up to Boston one winter to work, and while he was there, he fell in love with a girl named Hester Murray. She was working in a store, and she hated it. She'd been brought up in the country, and she always wanted to get back. When Jordan asked her to marry him, she said she would if he'd take her away to some quiet spot where she'd see nothing but fields and trees. So he brought her to Avonlea. Mrs. Lynde said he was taking a fearful risk in marrying a Yankee, and it's certain that Hester was very delicate and a very poor housekeeper. But Mother says she was very pretty and sweet, and Jordan just worshipped the ground she walked on. Well, Mr. Gray gave Jordan this farm, and he built a little house back here, and Jordan and Hester lived in it for 4 years. She never went out much, and hardly anybody went to see her except Mother and Mrs. Lynde. Jordan made her this garden, and she was crazy about it and spent most of her time in it. She wasn't much of a housekeeper, but she had a knack with flowers, and then she got sick. Mother says she thinks she was in consumption before she ever came here. She never really laid up, but just grew weaker and weaker all the time. Jordan wouldn't have anybody to wait on her. He did it all himself, and Mother says he was as tender and gentle as a woman. Every day he'd wrap her in a shawl and carry her out to the garden, and she'd lie there on a bench, quite happy. They say she used to make Jordan kneel down by her every night and morning and pray with her that she might die out in the garden when the time came, and her prayer was answered. One day, Jordan carried her out to the bench, and then he picked all the roses that were out and heaped them over her, and she just smiled up at him and closed her eyes. And that, concluded Diana softly, was the end.
Oh, what a dear story,
sighed Anne, wiping away her tears. What became of Jordan? asked Priscilla. He sold the farm after Hester died and went back to Boston. Mr. Jabez Sloane bought the farm and hauled the little house out to the road. Jordan died about 10 years after, and he was brought home and buried beside Hester. I can't understand how she could have wanted to live back here, away from everything, said Jane.
Oh, I can easily understand that, said Anne thoughtfully. I wouldn't want it myself for a steady thing because although I love the fields and woods, I love people too. But I can understand it in Hester. She was tired to death of the noise of the big city and the crowds of people always coming and going and caring nothing for her. She just wanted to escape from it all to some still, green, friendly place where she could rest, and she got just what she wanted, which is something very few people do, I believe. She had 4 beautiful years before she died, 4 years of perfect happiness. So I think she was to be envied more than pitied, and then to shut your eyes and fall asleep among roses, with the one you love best on earth smiling down at you. Oh, I think it was beautiful.
She set out those cherry trees over there, said Diana. She told Mother she never lived to eat their fruit, but she wanted to think that something she had planted would go on living and helping to make the world beautiful after she was dead.
I'm so glad we came this way,
said Anne, the shining-eyed.
This is my adopted birthday, you know, and this garden and its story is the birthday gift it has given me. Did your mother ever tell you what Hester Gray looked like, Diana?
No, only just that she was pretty.
I'm rather glad of that because I can't imagine what she looked like without being hampered by facts. I think she was very slight and small, with softly curling dark hair and big, sweet, timid brown eyes, and a little wistful, pale face.
The girls left their baskets in Hester's garden and spent the rest of the afternoon rambling in the woods and fields surrounding it, discovering many pretty nooks and lanes. When they got hungry, they had lunch in the prettiest spot of all, on the steep bank of a gurgling brook where white birches shot up out of long, feathery grasses. The girls sat down by the roots and did full justice to Anne's dainties, even the unpoetical sandwiches being greatly appreciated by hearty and spoiled appetites, sharpened by all the fresh air and exercise they had enjoyed. Anne had brought glasses and lemonade for her guests, but for her own part drank cold brook water from a cup fashioned out of birch bark. The cup leaked, and the water tasted of earth, as brook water is apt to do in spring, but Anne thought it more appropriate to the occasion than lemonade.
Look, do you see that poem?
She said suddenly, pointing. Where? Jane and Diana stared, as if expecting to see runic rhymes on the birch trees.
There, down in the brook. That old, green, mossy log, with the water flowing over it in those smooth ripples that look as if they'd been combed, and that single shaft of sunshine falling right athwart it, far down into the pool. Oh, it's the most beautiful poem I ever saw.
I should rather call it a picture, said Jane. A poem is lines and verses.
Oh, dear me, no.
Anne shook her head with its fluffy, white cherry coronal positivity. Anne shook her head with its fluffy, white cherry coronal positively.
The lines and verses are only the outward garments of the poem, and are no more really than your ruffles and flounces are you, Jane. The real poem is the soul within them, and that beautiful bit is the soul of an unwritten poem. It is not every day one sees a soul, even of a poem. I wonder what a soul, a person's soul, would look like, said Priscilla dreamily. Like that, I should think, answered Anne, pointing to a radiance of sifted sunlight streaming through a birch tree. Only with shape and features, of course. I like to fancy souls as being made of light, and some are all shot through with rosy stains and quivers, and some have a soft glitter like moonlight on the sea, and some are pale and transparent like mist at dawn. I read somewhere once that souls were like flowers, said Priscilla. Then your soul is a golden narcissus, said Anne, and Diana's is like a red, red rose. Jane's is an apple blossom, pink and wholesome and sweet, and your own is a white violet, with purple streaks in its heart, finished Priscilla. Jane whispered to Diana that she really could not understand what they were talking about. Could she? The girls went home by the light of a calm golden sunset, their baskets filled with narcissus blossoms from Hester's garden, some of which Anne carried to the cemetery next day and laid upon Hester's grave. Minstrel robins were whistling in the firs, and the frogs were singing in the marshes. All the basins among the hills were brimmed with topaz and emerald light. Well, we have had a lovely time after all, said Diana, as if she had hardly expected to have it when she set out. It has been a truly golden day, said Priscilla. I'm really awfully fond of the woods myself, said Jane. Anne said nothing. She was looking afar into the western sky and thinking of little Hester Gray. Chapter 14. A Danger Averted. Anne, walking home from the post office one Friday evening, was joined by Mrs. Lynde, who was as usual cumbered with all the cares of church and state. I've just been down to Timothy Cotton's to see if I could get Alice Louise to help me for a few days, she said. I had her last week, for though she's too slow to stop quick, she's better than nobody. But she's sick and can't come. Timothy's sitting there too, coughing and complaining. He's been dying for 10 years, and he'll go on dying for 10 years more. That kind can't even die and have done with it. They can't stick to anything, even to being sick, long enough to finish it. They're a terrible shiftless family, and what is to become of them I don't know, but perhaps Providence does. Mrs. Lynde sighed, as if she rather doubted the extent of providential knowledge on the subject. Marilla was in about her eyes again Tuesday, wasn't she? What did the specialist think of them? She continued. He was much pleased, said Anne brightly. He says there is a great improvement in them, and he thinks the danger of her losing her sight completely is past. But he says she'll never be able to read much, or do any fine handwork again. How are your preparations for your bazaar coming on?
The Ladies' Aid Society was preparing for a fair and supper, and Mrs. Lynde was the head and front of the enterprise. Pretty well. And that reminds me, Mrs. Allen thinks it would be nice to fix up a booth like an old-time kitchen and serve a supper of baked beans, donuts, pie, and so on. We're collecting old-fashioned fixings everywhere. Mrs. Simon Fletcher is going to lend us her mother's braided rugs, and Mrs. Levy Bolter some old chairs, and Aunt Mary Shaw will lend us her cupboard with the glass doors. I suppose Marilla will let us have her brass candlesticks, and we want all the old dishes we can get. Mrs. Allen especially set on having a real blue willow-ware platter if we can find one, but nobody seems to have one. Do you know where we could get one?
Miss Josephine Barry has one. I'll write and ask her if she'll lend it for the occasion, said Anne.
Well, I wish she would. I guess we'll have to supper in about a fortnight's time. Uncle Abe Andrews prophesying rain and storms for about that time, and that's a pretty sure sign we'll have fine weather. The said Uncle Abe, it may be mentioned, was at least like other prophets in that he had small honor in his own country. He was, in fact, considered in the light of a standing joke, for few of his weather predictions were ever fulfilled. Mr. Elisha Wright, who labored under the impression that he was a local wit, used to say that nobody in Avonlea ever thought of looking in the Charlottetown dailies for weather probabilities. No, they just asked Uncle Abe what it was going to be tomorrow and expected the opposite. Nothing daunted, Uncle Abe kept on prophesying. Anne had come home from school that previous evening to find Marilla away at an aid meeting, Dora asleep on the kitchen sofa, and Davy in the sitting-room closet, blissfully absorbing the contents of a jar of Marilla's famous yellow plum preserves. Company jam, Davy called it, which he had been forbidden to touch. He looked very guilty when Anne pounced on him and whisked him out of the closet.
Davy Keefe, don't you know that it's very wrong of you to be eating that jam when you were told never to meddle with anything in that closet?
Yes, I knew it was wrong, admitted Davy uncomfortably. But plum jam is awful nice, Anne. I just peeped in and it looked so good I thought I'd take just a weeny taste. I stuck my finger in.
Anne groaned.
I licked it clean, and it was so much gooder than I'd ever thought that I got a spoon and just sailed in.
Anne gave him such a serious lecture on the sin of stealing plum jam that Davy became conscience-stricken and promised with repentant kisses never to do it again.
Anyhow, there'll be plenty of jam in heaven, that's one comfort,
he said complacently. Anne nipped a smile in the bud.
Perhaps there will, if we want it, she said.
The AVIS met at Mr. Harmon Andrews that evening, and a full attendance had been requested, since important business was to be discussed. The AVIS was in a flourishing condition, and had already accomplished wonders. Early in the spring, Mr. Major Spencer had redeemed his promise, and he had stumped, graded, and seeded down all the road front of his farm. A dozen other men, some prompted by a determination not to let Spencer get ahead of them, others goaded into action by improvers in their own households, had followed his example. The result was that there were long strips of smooth velvet turf where once had been unsightly undergrowth or brush. The farm fronts that had not been done looked so badly, by contrast, that their owners were secretly shamed into resolving to see what they could do another spring. The triangle of ground at the crossroads had also been cleared and seeded down, and Anne's bed of geraniums, unharmed by any marauding cow, was already set out in the corner, was already set out in the center. Altogether, the improvers thought that they were getting on beautifully, even if Mr. Levy Bolter, tactfully approached by a carefully selected committee in regard to the old house on his upper farm, did bluntly tell them that he wasn't going to have it meddled with. At this special meeting, they intended to draw up a petition to the school trustees, humbly praying that a fence be put around the school grounds, and a plan was also to be discussed for planting a few ornamental trees by the church if the funds of the society would permit of it. For, as Anne said, there was no use in starting another subscription as long as the hall remained blue. The members were assembled in the Andrews parlor, and Jane was already on her feet to move the appointment of a committee which should find out and report on the price of said trees, when Gertie Pye swept in, pum-pattered and frilled within an inch of her life. Gertie had a habit of being late. To make her entrance more effective, spiteful people said. Gertie's entrance in this instance was certainly effective, for she paused dramatically on the middle of the floor, threw up her hands, rolled her eyes, and exclaimed,
"I've just heard something perfectly awful. What do you think? Mr. Judson Parker is going to rent all the road fence of his farm to a patent medicine company to paint advertisements on."
For once in her life, Gertie Pye made all the sensation she desired. If she had thrown a bomb among the complacent approvers, she could hardly have made more.
It can't be true,"
said Anne blankly.
"That's just what I said when I heard it first, don't you know?"
said Gertie, who was enjoying herself hugely.
"I said it couldn't be true, that Judson Parker wouldn't have the heart to do it, don't you know? But Father met him this afternoon and asked him about it, and he said it was true. Just fancy his farm is side on to the New Bridge Road, and how perfectly awful it would look to see advertisements of pills and plasters all along it, don't you know?"
The improvers did know all too well. Even the least imaginative among them could picture the grotesque effect of half a mile of board fence adorned with such advertisements. All thought of church and school grounds vanished before this new danger. Parliamentary rules and regulations were forgotten, and Anne, in despair, gave up trying to keep minutes at all. Everybody talked at once, and fearful was the hubbub.
"Oh, let us keep calm,"
implored Anne, who was the most excited of them all,
"and try to think of some way of preventing him."
"I don't know how you're going to prevent him," exclaimed Jane bitterly. "Everybody knows what Judson Parker is. He'd do anything for money. He hasn't a spark of public spirit or any sense of the beautiful." The prospect looked rather unpromising. Judson Parker and his sister were the only Parkers in Avonlea, so that no leverage could be exerted by family connections. Martha Parker was a lady of all too certain age who disapproved of young people in general, and the improvers in particular. Judson was a jovial, smooth-spoken man, so uniformly good-natured and bland that it was surprising how few friends he had. Perhaps he had got the better in too many business transactions, which seldom makes for popularity. He was reputed to be very sharp, and it was the general opinion that he hadn't much principle. "If Judson Parker has a chance to turn an honest penny, as he says himself, he'll never lose it," declared Fred Wright.
"Is there nobody who has any influence over him?"
asked Anne despairingly.
"He goes to see Louisa Spencer at White Sands," suggested Carrie Sloane. "Perhaps she could coax him not to rent his fences."
"Not she," said Gilbert emphatically. "I know Louisa Spencer well. She doesn't believe in village improvement societies, but she does believe in dollars and cents. She'd be more likely to urge Judson on than to dissuade him."
"The only thing to do is to appoint a committee to wait on him and protest," said Julia Bell. "And you must send girls, for he'd hardly be civil to boys. But I won't go, so nobody need nominate me."
"Better send Anne alone," said Oliver Sloane. "She can talk Judson over if anybody can." Anne protested. She was willing to go and do the talking, but she must have others with her for moral support. Dinah and Jane were therefore appointed to support her morally, and the improvers broke up buzzing like angry bees with indignation. Anne was so worried that she didn't sleep until nearly morning, and then she dreamed that the trustees had put a fence around the school and painted tri-purple pills all over it. The committee waited on Judson Parker the next afternoon. Anne pleaded eloquently against his nefarious design, and Jane and Diana supported her morally and valiantly. Judson was sleek, suave, flattering, paid them several compliments of the delicacy of sunflowers, felt real bad to refuse such charming young ladies. But business was business. Couldn't afford to let sentiment stand in the way these hard times. Anne, I've been wanting to see you about that little matter we were discussing the other day. I've decided not to let my fences to that company after all. A society with an aim like yours ought to be encouraged. Anne poured out the merest trifle.
Thank you,
she said. And you needn't mention that little conversation of mine with Jerry.
I have no intention of mentioning it in any case,
said Anne icily, for she would have seen every fence in Avonlea painted with advertisements before she would have stooped to bargain with a man who would sell his vote. Just so, agreed Judson, imagining that they understood each other beautifully. I didn't suppose you would. Of course I was only stringing Jerry. He thinks he's so all-fired cute and smart. I've no intention of voting for Amesbury. I'm going to vote for Grant, as I've always done. You'll see that when the election comes off. I just led Jerry on to see if he would commit himself, and it's all right about the fence. You can tell the improvers that.
It takes all sorts of people to make a world, as I've often heard, but I think there are some who could be spared.
Anne told her reflection in the east gable mirror that night.
I wouldn't have mentioned the disgraceful thing to Sol anyhow, so my conscience is clear on that score. I really don't know who or what is to be thanked for this. I did nothing to bring it about, and it's hard to believe that Providence ever works by means of the kind of politics men like Judson Parker and Jerry Corcoran have.